The supper plates were cooling beside a chipped enamel sink in a small American kitchen. A cast-iron skillet sat on the stove, still shining with bacon grease. On the table were three things a modern trash bag might swallow without a thought: a bread heel, a picked-over chicken bone, and a saucer streaked with gravy. To a tired family, supper was finished. To Grandma, tomorrow had already started. One careless scrape could mean thinner soup, plainer beans, or breakfast without the flavor that made it feel like food. So the old kitchen did not begin with the question, "Is this trash?" It began with a better one. What can this still become? That question lived in many American homes through Depression years, wartime rationing, farm seasons, Milltown paydays, and lean, ordinary weeks. Not every family saved the same things. Not every old practice was safe or worth copying exactly today. Modern refrigeration, sanitation, and food safety rules exist for good reasons. But the deeper habit still matters. Older kitchens often saw value before they saw waste. They did not treat supper as the end of food. They treated it as the moment when food changed jobs. First was bacon grease, often saved in a cup, crock, tin, or coffee can near the stove. For many working families, that grease was not just fat. It was stored flavor. A spoonful could season green beans, fry potatoes, soften cornbread edges, or give beans a smoky backbone. Some cooks poured it carefully, leaving dark burned bits behind. Some strained it, depending on the household and the use. This was not fancy cooking. It was practical memory sitting beside the stove. Second were chicken bones, picked clean on the plate but still valuable in the pot. After Sunday dinner, a carcass might simmer with onion ends, celery tops, carrot scraps, and salt. It did not need a printed recipe. It needed time, heat, and judgment. The bones gave body. The scraps gave fragrance. The stove turned what looked finished into broth for noodles, dumplings, rice, or garden vegetables. A bare bone was not abundance, but in a careful kitchen, it still had one more service to give. Third was the ham bone, one of the most respected leftovers in many country and working-class kitchens. A holiday ham might be sliced until the knife finally met bone, but that bone was not cleared away like table scraps. It could season beans, split pea soup, cabbage, greens, or potatoes. The smoky edges and small bits near the joint carried more flavor than their size suggested. For households with little cash to spare, meat often had to travel farther than one meal. The ham bone helped it do that. It made a second pot taste like the first dinner had left a blessing behind. Fourth came bread heels, the end slices children often tried to avoid. Grandma might tuck them into a bread box, paper sack, or coffee can behind the flour. Too dry for a sandwich did not mean too old for use. Bread heels became crumbs for meatloaf, salmon patties, dressing, casseroles, or soup thickener. Fifth were stale biscuits, especially in southern homes, farm kitchens, and places where biscuits belonged to the day's rhythm. A biscuit left after supper could return at breakfast, split open and warmed near the stove. It could be covered with gravy, crumbled into milk, tucked beside eggs, or broken into dressing. Sixth were potato peels, which show the difference between automatic waste and household judgment. In many homes, peelings went to chickens, pigs, compost piles, or garden soil. The point was not that every peeling belonged in a meal. The point was that scraps had destinations: animals, compost, soup pot, stove, cellar shelf. Seventh were vegetable ends, the onion skins, carrot tips, celery leaves, parsley stems, and cabbage cores left after chopping. Today they often disappear into the trash before anyone considers them. Older cooks often treated them as small helpers. Some went into broth, some went to livestock, some went to compost that would feed another season. Eighth was leftover gravy, guarded more carefully than many people guard a full plate today. A few spoonfuls in the pan might look too small to save, but in a covered dish or jelly jar, it could moisten biscuits, enrich soup, stretch hash, or revive fried potatoes. Gravy carried flour, fat, pepper, meat drippings, and the brown taste from the bottom of the pan. Ninth was pickle juice, cloudy in the jar after the last spear was gone. Many older kitchens did not send that brine straight down the sink. It already held vinegar, salt, dill, garlic, mustard seed, and the sharpness that woke up plain food. A spoonful could brighten potato salad, cabbage slaw, deviled eggs, or a bowl of beans. 10th were the jars themselves, lined up on cellar shelves, windowsills, and back porch tables. Jelly jars, pickle jars, coffee jars, and mayonnaise jars became a quiet storage system. One jar held bacon grease, one held buttons, one held nails from a loose screen door. Another held dried beans, saved seeds, rubber bands, soup, or leftover pudding. The old kitchen did not treat leftovers as shameful. It treated them as parts waiting to be reassigned. That was not nostalgia for hardship. It was a household way of seeing. Before anything was thrown away, it had to answer one final question. What can this still become? 11th were meat drippings, especially the dark browned bits left in a skillet or roasting pan. Today, a pan may go under hot water before anyone studies what is stuck there. Older cooks often paused. Those bits could become gravy, soup base, pan flavor, or seasoning for potatoes and greens. A splash of liquid loosened what heat had fastened to the metal. That was not just thrift. It was knowing how to read a pan. The bottom of the skillet carried the story of supper. Beef, pork, chicken, onions, flour, pepper, and heat had all left their mark. A careless rinse erased it. A careful cook took the last good thing before washing the pan clean. 12th were coffee grounds, black and wet in the bottom of the pot. In many households, used grounds went to the compost pile, garden soil, or sometimes around plants. Some people used them to scrub greasy pans or help absorb stale odors in a small space. Not every old claim about coffee grounds was perfect science. Some ideas were family habit, not laboratory fact. But the behavior behind it was worth keeping. Waste was tested before it was dismissed. The old kitchen gave leftovers a second audition before calling them useless. 13th were pie crust scraps, the ragged strips left after trimming the edge. A modern cook might sweep them away with the flour. Grandma was more likely to gather them, dust them with cinnamon and sugar, and bake them beside the pie. Children knew those little pieces as the treat before dessert. In some homes, scraps became crackers, dumpling pieces, or a rough top for a small leftover dish. It was not a grand act of survival. It was something quieter. A child watching from the table learned that even the edges had a place. Even the trimmings could become something sweet. 14th was cold rice, stiff in a bowl after supper. For families that cooked rice regularly, especially in parts of the South and coastal communities, leftovers were not failure. Cold rice could thicken soup, become rice pudding, stretch meat into patties, or fry with vegetables and egg. The texture changed overnight. Instead of fighting that change, older cooks used it. Yesterday's soft rice became today's firm rice, and firm rice could handle a skillet better. They let yesterday's texture become tomorrow's dish. 15th was the soup pot itself, less an object than a household strategy. A soup pot could receive bones, vegetable ends, gravy, rice, beans, potatoes, herbs, and scraps of meat. It turned scattered leftovers into one honest meal. The pot created order. It took what was too small alone and made it large enough together. That was the hidden economy of the house, not money in a bank. Usefulness stored in jars, pans, bones, crumbs, and the memory of what could still fit together. 16th were apple peels and cores, especially during pie making, applesauce days, or fall preserving. Clean peels might simmer into jelly, flavor vinegar, feed livestock, or join the compost heap. Nothing about an apple ended at the first knife cut. 17th were eggshells, pale and broken beside the sink. Many gardeners crushed them for compost or soil use. Some families fed crushed shells back to chickens as a calcium source. A shell was not dinner, but it might still serve the hens, the garden, or the cleaning shelf before it disappeared. 18th was the liquid left from beans, often called bean broth or pot liquor. In many southern kitchens, and in plenty of rural homes elsewhere, that liquid was not poured away casually. It held starch, salt, onion, pepper, smoke, and whatever seasoning meat had shared with the pot. Grandma might save it for soup, greens, cornbread dipping, or another small batch of beans. Today, people often drain flavor because a recipe card, package, or habit tells them to. Older cooks were more likely to taste what was in front of them. If the liquid still tasted like food, it still belonged to food. It was knowing that flavor had already been earned. 19th were cornbread crumbs, left in the skillet, scattered on plates, or caught in the tablecloth. Dry cornbread could be crumbled into milk, spooned under beans, folded into dressing, or used to thicken soup. In some homes, it became part of breakfast instead of yesterday's side dish. 20th were wilted greens, the tired leaves that looked too sad for the supper plate. Collards, cabbage, turnip greens, spinach, or garden lettuce might still have value if they were safe and sound. They could go into soup, eggs, beans, potatoes, or a skillet with drippings. Older cooks often understood the difference between tired food and spoiled food. But the old habit was still useful. Food, like tools and clothing, sometimes has another service left after it stops looking perfect. 21st were leftover mashed potatoes, cold and stiff by morning. In many kitchens, they did not sit forgotten until they turned sour. They became potato cakes in a cast iron skillet. Yesterday's potatoes did not have to return as yesterday's potatoes. They could come back browned, crisp-edged, and useful. The real skill was not pretending scraps were feasts. It was knowing when good food still had life left in it. 22nd were bits of meat too small to carve. A spoonful of roast, 2 scraps of chicken, or the edge of pork did not look like much. Chopped fine, those scraps could season hash, soup, gravy, dumplings, beans, or a lunch sandwich. A little meat carried more influence than its size suggested. It gave smell to the pan. It gave satisfaction to a plain dish. A small, rich thing could travel through a larger plain thing if the cook knew where to place it. 23rd was the last spoonful of jam, syrup, or preserves clinging to the jar. Grandma might swirl in hot water for a sweet drink. She might shake in vinegar for dressing. She might stir it into oatmeal or spread the last shine across a biscuit. A child might get the jar with a small spoon, and no complaint from the adults. The jar taught the lesson by being scraped clean. Older kitchens had a stricter definition of empty. Empty meant the glass had nothing reasonable left to give. 24th were crumbs from crackers, cookies, and the bottom of cereal tins. Those crumbs could top baked apples, stretch a pie crust, coat fish, sweeten pudding, or add texture to dessert. A cigar box, tin can, or folded paper sack could become a small bank of usefulness. Not money exactly, something more immediate. A saved crumb could not pay rent, but it could keep a dish from feeling bare. 25th was dishwater judgment, though not the dishwater itself. After supper, Grandma noticed what the plates revealed. Who left crusts? Which vegetables came back untouched? What portion was too large? That kind of watching shaped tomorrow's cooking. A frugal kitchen was not only about saving scraps after the meal, it was about learning from the scraps so fewer appeared next time. That may be the most useful idea for modern families. The older kitchen was not perfect, but the useful point is attention, not copying every practice. That was the deeper pattern behind the supper table. Just the steady belief that usefulness deserved one more question before being thrown away. What can this still become? In older American kitchens, that question helped families stretch meals and respect labor. Modern homes may still need the old habit of looking twice. Because after supper, when the plates are quiet and the stove is cooling, a household tells the truth about itself. It shows whether food was honored, carried forward, and given every reasonable chance to serve again.